Appamada and its programs are supported by your generosity, and your generosity and support makes such a difference. You can find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. So nice to have you here in the Zendo, and lovely to have you all online. I can't see all of you at the moment, but I'm sure I will in a little bit. So it's wonderful to have you. And for anyone who might be tuning in later on, especially those from our sangos in Madison, Minnesota, Chicago, England, Switzerland, and Hawaii, welcome, and thank you for joining for this special occasion. This being the Buddha's Day of Enlightenment. So I'm really excited about this celebration and gathering here together on this joyous occasion to celebrate the Buddha's enlightenment. And at the same time, I think part of this is gathering together and expressing our immense gratitude for the teachings that we received from Shakyamuni Buddha, who offered these teachings to the world so that all sentient beings may be free of suffering and eliminate suffering in their own lives and in the lives of others. What greater gift can a teacher give? So I want to start out by talking a little bit about the history of Buddha, the man, his life story, and then we'll talk a little bit about what that means to us now, the fact that we have these teachings and that we have these teachings in our life. And then lastly, we'll do a little ceremony at the end. So, to start off, Siddhartha Gautama was born in Saka. This is we're talking about areas in Nepal, what is now Nepal today. And this is the northernmost republic of what is now Nepal. And he was born during the 6th century before Common Era, so a long time ago. At the time of his birth, a Brahmin seer foretold the coming enlightenment of this child, of this prince. So it was in the stars, shall we say, that he was to become a teacher, a spiritual teacher. So he was the son of the king Sojadana, who was a member of a sangha, and sangha in this context means something different. It means the regular assembly of aristocrats that were in charge of governing this area, and the actual Sakyan, which is a family name, Sakyan clansmen, and their families. So he was the king of that and of this very large territory. So Prince Siddhartha lived within the walls of the compound of this castle. Supposedly there were 3 other castles that he could play in, and was never allowed to go outside the bounds of this area, of the castle itself. So he was a very protected young man, and yet he was given whatever he desired, was well taken care of, and so forth. So at some point, when he became older, in his 20s, he was curious about what was outside, what's in the outside world. I can imagine myself doing the same. And he had an aide assist him to leave, and they took him into the surrounds of the castle, the area around there. And he saw for the first time in his life someone who was aging. He'd never seen that before. He'd been kept away from that. somebody said, well, what is wrong with this person? They don't look, young and healthy like the rest of us. And so his aides say, well, no, he's just aged. That's what happens. That's what we do. So he was surprised by it, somewhat shocked, seeing something new. And it's curious, he thought about it, and the way they describe it, my primary resource was The Life of the Buddha, which is by Bhikkhu Nyan Namali. And there's a set of lines that were very interesting, attributed to the Buddha, and that was, and I don't have all of them here, but it's the gist of it, that he's thinking it's seeing an aged person. He says, when an untaught ordinary man who is subject to aging, not safe from aging, is shocked, humiliated, and disgusted, for he forgets that he himself is no exception. But I too am subject to aging, not safe from aging, and so it cannot benefit me to be shocked, humiliated, and disgusted on seeing another who is aging. When I consider this, the vanity of youth entirely left me. I just really love that, clear thinking. Oh yeah, includes me, especially for a young person seeing this for the first time. So he goes back to the castle, goes on, and then the next time he wants to go out again, more exploring on the outside, and the aide helps him to go, and he sees a sick person. He's never seen a sick person before. He's been sheltered from that. And so he asks the aide, what's going on with this guy? What's wrong with him? And of course the answer is, well, he's sick. His body is not well. It's healthy, and this is what that looks like. So again, he's surprised and shocked by it. And then this clear thinking comes in again, and he says the same. Seeing a sick person, when an untaught, ordinary man who is subject to sickness, not safe from sickness, is shocked, humiliated, and disgusted, for he forgets that he himself is no exception. But I too am subject to sickness, not safe from sickness. So it cannot benefit me to be shocked, humiliated, and disgusted on seeing another who is sick. When I considered this, the vanity of my health entirely left me. And the same thing holds for the next episode he took outside the castle, which was to see someone who had died. Someone laid out on the ground with the cloth on it, and again asking, what's this? He said, well, it's someone who's died. And again, he had never experienced this. So it was left him with surprise, but he went through the same thinking, that when an untaught ordinary man who is subject to death, not safe from death, he is shocked, humiliated, and disgusted, for he forgets that he himself is no exception. But I too am subject to death, not safe from death, and so it cannot benefit me to be shocked, humiliated, and disgusted on seeing another who is deceased. When I consider this, the vanity of my living entirely left me. So this was a very important thing in the life of the Buddha, to actually finally be aware of what this is impermanence, right? And understood it very clearly. This is where we all are going to age, get sick, and die. So it was an important learning for him. Not too long after that, he decided the life in the castle was not for him. Where he wanted to, his interest was to become a holy man. So he decided to go forth into homelessness and become an ascetic monk. So he renounced all his sense pleasures and wanted to seek sublime peace. That was his objective. So he went out and he found lots lots of people there at that time, that age, I guess, there were lots of people going forth and going into the woods and so forth. And so he met some people, met priests and so forth. And he eventually heard of the teacher, Alana Kalana, and that was his first teacher. And he met with this man and he said he wanted to live the holy life and the Dharma and the discipline, and that he wanted this guy to be his teacher. So Kalama said, well, yes, if a wise person can learn this teaching fairly quickly, come teach with me. And so he did. And so he learned the teachings, which were based on what he calls nothingness, which I presume is emptiness, but it's not clear actually. And so he learned that from this teacher, and then he was allowed to teach. And then he got dissatisfied again because these teachings did not help him with his quest. His quest being, I'm looking to learn how to have dispassion, how to have this peace in my life. So he actually left that teacher and found another one later, whose name was Ujjaka Ramaputta. And this teacher had other teachings. He also taught what the first fellow, Kalama, did. And plus he did also higher attainment of consisting of neither perception nor non-perception, just so teaching in the spiritual life. So again, Siddhartha stays and with this man and learns his teaching and practices. And again, the teacher is very impressed with how well he does and how he's actually learning the teachers and is able to teach them so well. So he says, okay, you teach. And so he started teaching with this group. And after a length of time, he realized, and he still hadn't answered his question about how to find dispassion and also this sense of peace. So once again, he decided to leave. And from there, he started wandering through, it's called the Magadhan country. It's in another area of Nepal, it's now Nepal. And he eventually arrived at Senanagama near Uruvela, and you'd have to see a map for that to be very meaningful for you, but this is another area. So he found a place there where he found a grove that he thought was ideal. And there was a clear river running there with nice smooth banks, and then there was a village nearby where he could make her alms, basically, take his bowl and beg for food. So at this time, he didn't have a teacher, but he was still, doing his practices. And one thing that came up, this area, there was a grove, but there was also the forest, and so he was sitting in the forest. And he talks about how a lot of other unpurified in bodily, verbal, and mental conduct, or in livelihood, or people who have uncalm minds, or people who talk bad about other people with bad habits like that they would have a hard time sitting in the forest, because they would just be upset all the time. It's this wild place, there's animals there and such a thing. And say, but no, I am steady. I can tolerate this. This stuff isn't going to come up for me. I've gotten over all of that. But in fact, when the bushes started moving, and the sounds of the animals approach, he realized he did have this anticipation of dread and fear in the woods. And so I had never heard this story before. This is new to me. Anyway, so he said, well, how can I subdue these feelings of fear and dread. And so he said, I can sit down. I can sit down and I will subdue these feelings. And so he said, I'm not going to walk. I'm not going to lie down. I'm not going to lay down. I'm just going to sit here. And so he did. And he maintained his sitting posture without walking, standing, or lying down till he had subdued his dread and fear. However, he although he had tireless energy, it was aroused at him during this, and he had unremitting mindfulness established while he was sitting there. He was so concentrated his sitting. But he was exhausted by the painful effort. And so these painful feelings arose. But he says that no, these painful feelings arose in me but gained no power over my mind. So that was a very interesting thing. So he could have this stuff, but he was able to hold it. That's basically the idea behind that. So after this, he dealt with this fear and dread. And he was still practicing these very severe ascetic practices. He didn't eat much at all. And he was basically, he had vowed to completely fast. And Mara came and said, oh, well, are you doing this? You need to eat. Blah, blah, blah. I see you, Mara, I have to not eat. So he just stopped eating entirely. And he talks about feeling his back. When he felt his back, he felt the front of his stomach. He was so bad, vice versa. Feeling his stomach, he felt his back up. Anyway, so he was really near to death at this point. And at that time, he thought, I have by this grueling penance, I have attained no distinction higher than the human state, worthy of the noble one's knowledge and vision. Might there be another way to enlightenment, rather than just grueling, not eating anything and sitting all the time, rightfully so, but he was so in such bad health by that time, did it make sense to continue? And then he had a memory of his childhood when he was around 6 years old, and it was at the celebration of the sowing. It was a celebration of plowing for the sowing, beginning of the sowing, not of sowing, but sowing the ground. In the little town he came from. His father was out doing the ceremonial plowing. And he had gone with his father and was left with nurses under a rose apple tree. And the nurses, of course, all ran down to watch the events. So he was left alone there. And as he sat there, this is what he's remembering. As he sat there, he was watching how he saw these green shoots in the fields and they were being plowed. And then he saw these insects and the eggs that the insects had laid on those green shoots. And for a moment, he had this incredible sense of compassion, like these little creatures were relatives that had just died. It was just for a moment. It was this very strong sorrow. And then he snapped back and he was thinking, oh, isn't it a beautiful day? And then he kind of went on. So this is a very interesting that he felt this, and then where he felt this extreme sorrow and then went back to the beautiful day and the joy that came up in his heart, which revealed to him how experiences change things. And the moment we become self-conscious, that is, aware of ourself, we come out of that compassion. We can have this open-heartedness, but the minute we start thinking about something about us, then that changes. So it's this whole idea of becoming, which we talk about in the dependent origination of becoming the central. That's when the self starts to form. Anyway, so he experienced that. So he has this moment of ecstasy when rapture takes him outside the body and beyond the prison of egoism, or the ego. And so he has this spontaneous moment of compassion and allowed the pain of the creatures that had nothing to do with him personally to pierce his heart. And then a surge of selfless empathy brought a moment of spiritual release. So meanwhile, he's back starving himself to death, basically. And then this recognition that, that there is another way to enlightenment. It doesn't have to be these very grueling practices that he'd been doing for so long. So at that time, this is the story of Suhata, who's a farmer's wife who finds him near death and then offers him some milk rice pudding, which ends his 6 years of asceticism. So, and once he had eaten and he became strong again, he entered into a series of meditations, ending with mindfulness and equanimity. And then he turned to the knowledge and recollection of his past lives. And then he entered into the 3 stages of enlightenment. And I read in one source it was 49 days actually that he was sitting under that tree. But anyway, this is a summation of all that stuff. Anyway, through the 3 stages of enlightenment. So during the first watch of the night, first stage, the Buddha discovered all of his past lives in the cycle of rebirth, realizing that he had been born and reborn countless times before. And ignorance, at this time, ignorance was banished, a light arose, but with no gain over his mind. In the second watch, the Buddha discovered the law of karma. Human beings pass according to their actions in body, speech, and mind. Then we have the dependent origination arose, and the importance of living by the Eightfold Path. During the third watch, the Buddha discovered the Four Noble Truths, and finally reaching Nirvana. So all traditions agree that in the third watch of the night, Siddhartha finally found the answers that he was seeking all along and became enlightened and experienced Nirvana. And then having done so, he became a Buddha, or the awakened one. After his enlightenment, it took him a while. He felt like what he had learned would be so difficult to teach. And so he didn't teach at first. He just was convinced of that. And it took a while before he was convinced by someone else to actually go and teach and how important it was to teach. So he did begin teaching. And then he thought, well, who am I going to teach? And then he thought, oh, I'll teach my 2 teachers, Kalama and Udaka. But it turned out that Kalama had died a month earlier, so that was impossible. And Udaka had died the night before. Well, that wasn't possible. So who am I going to teach? So then he considered the 5 monks with whom he had been practicing these ascetic practices for quite a long time. And because they had spurned him. When they saw him eating food, they spurned him. What? You're giving up. You're going to the other side. And so he approached them twice, and they would have nothing to do with it. He didn't think his teachings would be valid. And finally, the third time, they were more open. They realized, oh yeah, this is this guy we know, and we can trust him. And so he began to teach them. And then from there on, the teaching spread all over the place, even to Austin, Texas. So here we have the day that is celebrated in many parts of the world, the 8th of December. But here in Appamana, we usually celebrate it on the weekends, whatever day that is closest. There's some other people have had. There's another date that's used in other traditions, but this is the one that we celebrate. So before we what I wanted to get to beyond just the telling of the story I think is important to recount and connect with that story of the Buddha. And it's not so much that we don't worship Buddha, right? And his personality is, we don't focus on that, that's not our practice. But what our practice is to be aware of how the teachings came to be. And then I think, in my mind anyway, is we're also have an opportunity today, if not every day, to be grateful for having these teachings in our lives. And also have a day perhaps where we just take a moment and think about what teachings are impacting us now. What are they actually? What is it that we practice or that we are practicing with that comes from the teachings? Just to pay attention to that, or ones that we have used that have been really helpful to us. I think it's important to really reflect on that so we really fully appreciate these teachings and make, besides just, oh, we just do this. Well, yeah, we do it, and this is the impact. Notice the impact every once in a while. So yeah, this is important. This is important in my life. It's important that we come together and recognize that, I think, together. So what I would like to do is kind of open this up to the group to kind of talk about, just choose one thing, is whatever it might be, that you feel like a teaching like the Four Noble Truths, or just learning to be with. What part of the teachings are you maybe using or have used that have been important to you in your life? And I can start. Maybe that will help, because people get shy. So in my life, I've mentioned this story probably several times, but here it is again. That I notice things on a daily basis. In fact, I thought it was really interesting yesterday when I was putting some flowers together for the event, and I was looking at the flowers and placing them and so forth, and looking at the rose petals, particularly the rose petals, like just taking the rose petals off their little heads so we can scatter them. And I was just thinking, oh, these beautiful roses, somebody has been there working on these roses. They've been watching it for months. They've had the right temperature. They've had the right amount of moisture. And the sun, and the heat and so forth. So it was just a moment of opening up. It's like this inner being that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, of something that I was working with, that you can see beyond just what's there. And you make this connection with across time and across space. And to me, that's the a part of the idea of no self, is realizing all these connections. There's no one person doing anything. It's all got everything going on at once, connecting with each other and connecting in all different ways. So then a rose appears, completely formed and beautiful. So it's that kind of stuff that happens to me a lot. And then, the Four Noble Truths, when I really take time to work with that, I think the biggest thing is in relation to my mother, my poor mother. The Four Noble Truths, and really getting at what was my suffering. My suffering was, I thought it was her for many, 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 many years. I thought she was the problem. But in actuality, she wasn't the problem. The problem was I wanted something different. It's my expectations. And that really changed everything for me. Yeah. So then I had to work with that, my expectations. And so at some point, I got to the point where I could let that go. She doesn't have to be who I want her to be. She's just doing what she does, and she's a result of her own upbringing and conditioning. And, you know, it's like the rock out in the front yard. It's just sitting there in your way. You stub your toe on it every day. You can get mad at it, but that doesn't change anything, especially if it's a big rock, can't move it. So anyway, so that's my sharing. Maybe you guys feel so inclined. Nelda. I think you're muted. There you go.
Laurie, good morning, everyone. Well, I'll just talk. I don't know that we ever label any of the teachings with the word I'm going to use, but I find that this is my most difficult and most helpful practice. And the word is patience. And I think every element of our practice is contained in the word patience, because in patience is contained generosity, kindness, equanimity. It contains every one of those elements. And I know that part of our practice is to lose the self, but I find that the focus on my level of patience that I have or fail to have with myself is a direct reflection of my patience with others or lack thereof. So in some sense, I walk both sides of the road, constantly going back and forth and viewing the level of patience I have with myself and my humanity and my shortcomings or falls and getting up again, because it mirrors the level of patience and therefore compassion, equanimity, kindness I have toward others. So that is my main focus in my practice. It's not really any one of the precepts, it's all of the precepts. I'm actually mirroring everything you said, Laurie, because patience also includes this, or lack thereof, this failure. The lack of patience is this frustration with not having what you think things should be, or wanting more of what things are when they go away. And so, yeah, that's my practice right now. That is, I think that's contained in all the teachings. I think that's the fundamental, one of the fundamental principles of our practice that that challenges me and with which I'm working.
Thank you, Nelda. There's somebody here.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
What was I gonna say? Let's see. The story, I was thinking like the king, how much energy it takes to kind of make sure that my son doesn't get out, and put everything in place. And the anxiety that can build, over time. And I think that's like probably like an everyday practice or something for me. Like there's a want to not look at the uncomfortable things that come up, either outside of myself or inside myself. And they're just like, it'd just be nice to be in this kingdom, everything's just lovely. And it reminds me of the Buddha's practice may have really spurred on or got started when he looked at life as it is, and he faced it, and he turned towards it. And it wasn't like immediate that he felt sublime peace or something. There was a lot of pain, but in the long term, the steady being able to hold that, his first step was like holding that, with just seeing somebody that's older. And then with that brought some, I guess over time, brought some equanimity. So I think that's like for probably forever practice, because I might for some moments be in a place like that, but then also want to be more like the king, oh God, okay, this is as much as I can handle. So that's what spoke to me.
Thank you. Susan.
I'll try to describe an experience I recently had. It's a bit unusual, but maybe a fruit of practice. I will say though at the outset that practice pervades my life, really, just every aspect of it. But I recently traveled to Washington, D.C. and went to the Hirshhorn. And there was an exhibit there by a Japanese artist named, I think it's Yogai Kasuma. You know, is that how you say her name?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'd heard of her and I was kind of intrigued, and so I happened to be able to get into it, just got there at the right time, got a ticket. And I didn't really know what to expect, but she has one type of project that she's known for is something called infinity rooms. And so there are a couple of these, and so it's a box that you go into alone, and she's got it set up so that you have an experience when you're in it. And so I walked into one of these infinity rooms, and it's mirrors, and you basically see many, infinite images of yourself. And it was lit in a certain way. And I just had the most visceral and experiential experience of this, our infinite connectedness. I mean, like, oh my gosh, we are all connected. We are all one thing. And it was just like bodily. And, didn't expect that at all. Didn't have any conceptual, notion of that as I went in, but I know that is just the kind of fruit of the way my whole orientation has changed, over the years of practice. So something a little different, maybe. But it was really, I was actually quite moved. I started crying. But none of that would have happened without, it wasn't the artwork itself, it was that in combination with my experience, practice.
Thank you.
I could share something. So the part of the story that speaks to me today is, so it's told that like the last temptation was from Mara, essentially sowing self-doubt in the Buddha, like something along the lines of, who do you think you are that you could do this? Like, how could you be so arrogant? Stop. Which is a voice that's in various forms pervasive in my mind. And the Buddha's response is this. He just touches the ground, and it said that in that moment, that's when the turn happens. So to take for an example that like the place of refuge is not an idea, not even a really great idea that the Buddha could have, but it's something like under something else, something more than an idea. That's touching the earth, and I don't like to try to define what that means too tightly because I like to let it kind of work. But yeah, I have a Buddha. The Buddha that I have in my apartment it's an earth touching Buddha, and it just is an endless source of inspiration and a reminder that I need many times a day, every day.
Anybody else?
Darcy.
Oh, Darcy, sorry.
So what was coming up for me when you were talking, and I really haven't studied a whole lot as far as ancient texts or life of the Buddha. I mean, I heard the basic story, but as you were talking, what was coming up for me was, I mean, surely in this castle, this community, there were old people. Had to be old people. We didn't see it for the first time I knew that. Certainly there were people who got sick, you know. Anyway, so maybe it's some kind of resistance to this old stuff. I don't know. So anyway, I just was staying with my experience, right? And but I think what's common that I could really relate to is we all just want to kind of leave whatever, and it seems essential to leave home, leave our conditioning, you know, and take ourselves outside of it so we can get a new perspective. But what really hit me was after we went through all these convolutions, what really touched him was coming back to his origins. He's 6 years old, and he got it even then.
Yeah.
He got it even then. And there was vulnerability and dying. I'm not sure I hadn't quite heard that story before with the insects. I thought that was like he was in touch with something that I mean, it pained him to see it was there all along. That's what I got out of it.
Yeah.
You know, my practice has been such that I don't think I could have made it, you know, through these last couple of years. But what I was looking for is what does the life of the Buddha have to do with it? And so I got that gift from your talk.
Jeanette.
Thank you, Darcy. That was beautiful. The teachings that are working in me are to meet life as it is with compassion and gratitude. And especially at this time of year, I struggle because there were physical and emotional needs that weren't met in my infancy and childhood. And there's a longing in me to have them met. And there's a hope that is there that I will have them met. And sometimes there's an expectation that I will have them met. And when I'm in that experience, and my experience of others is that they're denying it to me, I go through so much suffering. And when I shift into the realization that nobody owes me anything, and that anything they offer is a gift, I shift into gratitude. And from there, I'm able to be compassionate and generous. So I go through this shift over and over again. And that's what's working in me most profoundly.
We done? I think we are. Okay, so I'd like to, let's do the service, I guess, and then we'll do the walk parties. Then we decide.
Maka hanya haramita shingyo